Welcome to this explainer. We're diving straight into a massive paradigm shift today, exploring the fascinating evolution of exactly how modern businesses interact with society. It really wasn't that long ago when an enterprise was judged solely by its balance sheet. But today, a business is increasingly viewed as a living, breathing organ of society itself. We are going to unpack exactly how and why this transformation happened, relying directly on the foundational concepts of business studies to map out this entirely new reality.
To wrap our heads around this shift, we're going to move through 6 quick stages: beyond profit, forces of change, the legal framework, serving stakeholders, the environment, and finally, business ethics.
All right, part 1, beyond profit. Let's zoom right in on the traditional heartbeat of any enterprise, making money.
For decades, the standard argument was pretty simple. A company should only care about its owners. The whole idea was to maximize profits. And talking about the public good, well, that was just seen as completely irrelevant. But does that purely profit-driven view actually hold up today? Since our world has gotten so incredibly interconnected, the idea that a business can operate in total isolation from the community it relies on, that's being heavily challenged.
And that brings us to the core tension we're looking at today: social responsibility. This is all about voluntary actions that benefit society, stretching way beyond just doing the bare minimum to stay out of trouble. Look, legal responsibility is just following the letter of the law. But social responsibility asks for more. It involves an element of voluntary action. Business folks voluntarily stepping up, respecting what society actually wants, and contributing to it, right alongside making their profits.
Moving on to Section 2, Forces of Change. Let's look at the push and pull of this debate. Because, as you can probably guess, not everyone was on board with this shift right away.
So on one side, you've got advocates arguing that social responsibility is basically an insurance policy for a company's long-term survival. They're saying, hey, doing good keeps regulators off our backs and uses our valuable resources to solve real problems. But on the flip side, critics make a fair point. They impartially argue that this completely violates the golden rule of profit maximization. Plus, let's be real, environmental and social programs are incredibly expensive. Critics argue that businesses might just pass those costs straight on to you, the consumer, effectively creating an unfair public tax all in the name of social responsibility.
But here's the reality check. Theoretical debates aside, some genuinely powerful forces have completely reshaped corporate behavior. Think about it. We saw organized labor movements get super educated and powerful, which totally ended those old-school hire and fire policies. Consumers woke up. The old vibe of let the buyer beware got entirely replaced by the customer is king. Throw in the constant, looming threat of government regulation and the rise of highly educated professional managers, and honestly, businesses literally had no choice but to adapt if they wanted to survive.
Which brings us to Section 3, the legal framework. Because as those forces grew, governments started stepping in to turn these social expectations into hard, unavoidable laws.
So the crucial point here is this dramatic number: 2%. If we look at India's Companies Act of 2013, we get a fascinating example of social duty being practically codified into law. Qualifying companies are actually pushed to spend 2% of their average net profit from the previous 3 years specifically on corporate social responsibility. And we're not just talking about a friendly suggestion. They have to set up a dedicated CSR committee with actual board members.
So who exactly has to play by these rules? Well, the law is targeting the absolute heavy hitters of the economy. If a business hits some massive thresholds, we're talking an annual turnover of 1,000 crore, a net worth of 500 crore, or a net profit of just 5 crore, boom, they fall under these CSR provisions. It's a targeted move to ensure the biggest players are giving back proportionately.
We can actually break this broader responsibility down into 4 distinct levels. At the absolute foundation, you have economic responsibility. Because, hey, you still have to produce goods and make a profit to keep the lights on. Right above that is legal responsibility, which just means operating strictly within the law. But then it's beautifully layered with these higher-level duties. Ethical responsibility, meaning you respect the social norms society expects, even if they aren't written into law. And finally, discretionary responsibility. This is the purely voluntary stuff, like charity work or disaster relief.
All right, Section 4, Serving Stakeholders. Let's zoom out a bit and look at exactly who a business is answering to every single day.
It's not just some abstract, faceless society out there. We're talking about specific groups of people. A modern business is literally doing a juggling act. They have a clear duty to their shareholders, making sure they get a fair return on investment and honest info about growth. But equally, they owe their workers meaningful work, fair wages, and the right to unionize. They owe consumers decent products at reasonable prices, without any of the misleading ad fluff. And lastly, they owe the government and the local community their honest tax dollars and the active protection of the environment we all share.
Speaking of the environment, Section 5, the environment, the ultimate stakeholder. Taking an even broader perspective, we hit the one stakeholder that impacts literally every single one of us, the planet. The reality of our industrial progress is pretty stark. Yes, businesses create immense wealth and jobs, but they're also a primary generator of the wastes and emissions that are actively degrading our natural resources. Pollution is physically, chemically, and biologically changing our air, land, and water. And since the Earth can only absorb so much, industrial waste is pushing our ecosystems right to the absolute brink.
But here's the thing. Controlling pollution isn't just about good PR or looking green in a brochure. It's highly practical. For the community, it dramatically reduces severe health hazards like cancer and respiratory diseases. And from a purely business standpoint, it radically lowers the risk of getting hit with massive legal liabilities and compensation payouts. Plus, and this is wild, it can actually save a ton of money. Upgrading to cleaner, more efficient tech usually means lower waste disposal costs and a leaner, cheaper operation in the long run.
So, how do they actually pull this off? You can't just wish your company into being green. Businesses have to follow some very structured steps. It starts with a definite, unwavering commitment right from top management. That green culture then has to be shared and literally ingrained into every single division and every employee. Finally, that commitment gets translated into clear-cut policies, like buying better raw materials and using actual scientific techniques for waste disposal.
Finally, Section 6, Business Ethics, the moral foundation. When you boil down all these legal, social, and environmental pressures, what you're left with is a core moral compass: business ethics. This is what defines what society considers right and wrong in corporate behavior. Sure, a business's individual goal might be to make money, but business ethics is all about making sure the methods and practices used to get that money are actually in harmony with the greater good.
And just like protecting the environment, building a genuinely ethical enterprise isn't passive, it's a highly active procedure. It absolutely demands top-down leadership to set the tone, but you also need strict compliance mechanisms to make sure those values aren't just empty words. You have to enthusiastically involve your workers at every single level to build that culture. And crucially, you have to measure the results to prove your ethical programs are actually working in the real world.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to chew on. We've seen that the standard for corporate behavior isn't just decided by the folks in the boardrooms. It's ultimately shaped by the society that allows them to exist in the first place. The massive shift from buyer beware to the customer's king absolutely proves that your voice matters. So knowing the incredible power of your choices, what level of ethical responsibility are you going to demand next from the businesses you support, work for, or maybe even lead one day? Thank you for joining me, and keep asking the big questions.